Reaptown, which is directed and written by Dutch Marsh, who also directed the movie Infernum, which, like this movie, was a train-based horror film. This one focuses on this woman as she goes to Reaptown on a kind of work release program after being released from prison to look for her sister, who was also released from prison and went to this kind of like this town and has since disappeared. She's given this kind of work release in this old kind of like antique train museum to be kind of like a night watch woman, and there may well be some type of entity living within this kind of museum. You have to watch the movie to find out, to see what happens. Let's discuss. So first of all, what works in this film? The main kind of like ticking the plus column for this movie is, I feel, it's superb location shooting. This kind of like antique kind of museums, train museum, obviously is, you know, the director is clearly a fan of trains, or he just happens to have access to this kind of like this kind of set, because it's obviously, or location, because it's obviously based in his last two films, but it looks really creepy. There is some really fantastic sequences in the night where this kind of like industrial kind of junk, it just kind of like looks very oppressive, very creepy, and really huge. You can imagine you're going to get lost in there and everything. There's some really great kind of like cinematography in regards to, I mean, it's not nothing special, but it really works as a kind of a creepy kind of just visual setting for a kind of a horror film. The movie also has this kind of dreary, oppressive feel to it. Always kind of somewhat of a negative overtone where you really feel like there's this, the pressure is on our kind of like protagonist, which gives it a kind of like a desperate feel. You feel the odds are against this kind of like this woman. And I have to say, I thought the performance, although it's relatively muted, was, you know, made for a compelling protagonist, where you do feel the odds are against her and she's kind of back is against the wall to a certain degree and has a certain amount of desperation. There are a couple of okay kind of creepy moments and jump scares in regards to our antagonist, shall we say. But let's talk about what works. Okay, the big one here is there's virtually no plot in this movie, unfortunately. The movie's running time, it consists mainly of our central female protagonist wandering around these dark corridors within this kind of like this train museum, and as creepy as that is, and it is creepy, unfortunately you need a kind of a narrative to go with it, and there seems to be a very, very slight one here. There's not really much in the way of plot here, unfortunately. It's just a very simple setup, and it just kind of plays out. I think the antagonist, let's just say, there's some interesting ideas here, but there's not enough done with it. We needed a little bit more, and unfortunately when we kind of see a little bit too much of our antagonist, it kind of looks a little bit silly. Like I said, there are a couple of moments where it looks kind of creepy and you're wondering kind of what's going on. Let's just say it's sort of like a ghoulish antagonist here, but unfortunately the makeup isn't brilliant, and there could have been more done with it. Considering this so lack of plot-wise, it really needed something. It has the opportunity to have more going on here. The movie ultimately becomes somewhat dull. It's somewhat of an oppressive film to start with, and that kind of works for a horror aesthetic, but when we don't have a compelling narrative to go along with that, it just becomes a dull watch, unfortunately, and the movie is incredibly slow with very little that happens, and ultimately becomes quite unsatisfying. So I feel this movie visually has some interesting things kind of going on, but we just don't get enough meat on the bones. I mean, even kind of like some character work, the actress does a decent enough job here, but she's not given a lot to do. Some character work outside of that kind of would have been helpful. We have this peripheral character of this like a journalist, which seems, I reckon that was done from reshoots, because it seems to have no real impact on the actual story itself. I just feel those scenes were probably added on to try and kind of like have somewhat of a different location, but it kind of sticks out that that's what's kind of happening, because there's no interplay between these really characters at all. So it's a little bit of a dull affair, but it's a great mood piece. But to be honest with you, for an entertainment, I can't really give this an above average mark, because I just don't think there's enough going on. You know, visuals alone do not make a compelling story, and this one does not have really a compelling story. It has elements of that. It could have been a good setup, but there's just not enough on the actual story itself. So So we'll give it a 4 out of 10. Not necessarily bad, but just a bit of a waste of an opportunity, ultimately. Have you seen Reaptown? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.